Breaking news out of a New York City courtroom right now. President-elect Donald Trump is being sentenced in his hush money conviction just 10 days before he is set to return to the White House. The unprecedented ruling follows a 5-4 decision by the Supreme Court to deny Trump's last-minute appeal last night. CNN's Laura Coates is outside the New York court. Laura, walk us through where things stand right now. A lot of things happening at this very moment.
Well, we may not have been here, but for the Supreme Court last night deciding in a 5-4 decision, a very tight ruling where Chief Justice John Roberts and Justice Amy Coney Barrett joined with the so-called liberal justices to say that this could go forward. We knew from the judge it was unlikely that this is going to be a jail imposition or a probation period or a fine. The judge has now had an opportunity to review a probation report written in connection with interviews from the president-elect and the probation officer, who said during the report that it seemed that Trump believed he was, quote, above the law. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, the president-elect, soon to be president in just 10 days, is arguing that the indictment itself should never have been brought. The Manhattan DA, Alvin Bragg, was wrong to bring this, and that, in fact, the American people, according to Todd Blanche, who will be number 2 at the DOJ following his inauguration, has believed that the American people did not want a case like this to be brought under a category of lawfare. The judge, Judge Merchan, has said, which is the understatement of a lifetime, this has been a truly extraordinary case. Indeed, it has been. We have never seen a time when an American president, former, of course, or president-elect, has been convicted of felony counts, this to the tune of 34. Now, it is a Class E felony in the state of New York, which normally does not necessarily bring a jail time. It's not universally accepted as that, but it doesn't always have jail time. But the idea of no probation, no fine is directly connected from the decision of the judge, it seemed, and we're waiting to hear that final point. This is a president-elect who has argued that he would be unable to fully govern if he were to have certain contingencies or conditions above him. He does note, the judge said, it is the office of the presidency that is extraordinary, not the occupant of the office. But again, he is a president-elect. Trump wanted this to be delayed until after he became the president again. The judge thought it was incumbent on the decision to honor the jury's verdict and, of course, the rule of law to allow this particular defendant and all defendants to have the finality of a sentence. Jim, although we are using the phrase convicted felon, there is a slight nuance to this. It is not a done deal until after the sentence, and then that's the catalyst to be able to have your full appellate rights and go after all the different legal issues here. Merchan says that once the courtroom doors closed, the trial was no different from any other in the courthouse. I was in that courthouse. I got to tell you, what was so extraordinary, aside from the fact that it was the former president of the United States there, is that he was being treated, and in a courtroom, unlike any other, not like any other defendant, when the rule of law and the criminal prosecution and the weight of your name after a jurisdiction versus is in front of you.
Yeah, and Laura, I guess when this is all said and done, and you were just saying, and we've all been saying, we expect there not to be a sentence of jail time or anything like that for the president-elect. But take us through the next steps. He'll be able to appeal the conviction. That process continues on even while he's president?
Oh, yes, he wants it to continue on. He does not want this title of convicted felon. He does not believe that this case should have been resurrected according to the laws and on the books. But remember, ever since this case even started, he was convicted and a verdict entered back in May of last year. The Supreme Court has issued this interim opinion about immunity, that not only can you not prosecute a sitting president for official acts, but you can't use official acts to then form the basis of evidence in criminal matters. Trump believes that his statements and statements that were made to people who were a part of the administration and beyond, whether it be Hope Hicks or others, should not have been allowed to be entered into the evidence and therefore could have unduly tainted the jury's view of the case. Merchan is saying, however, the considerable, indeed extraordinary legal protections afforded the office of the chief executive is a factor that overrides all else in his sentencing. But remember, he's a president-elect, so a lot of that is not applied to him yet, and the judge wanted this done beforehand. This will be quite a slap on the wrist. I'm curious if the judge will in fact address the contempt or even the statements Trump has made about the judge and his family as well.
All right, Laura Coates, thank you very much. With me now, CNN anchor and chief White House correspondent Caitlin Collins and CNN senior legal analyst and former federal prosecutor Ellie Honig. Ellie, let me go to you first. What's your reaction to what we've been hearing so far?
Well, it's pretty orderly, all things said. Donald Trump seems to have gone on a little bit of a tirade, but nothing unpredictable, nothing different from what he said before. One thing that I think is interesting is there's been no talk whatsoever, except from Donald Trump, about the actual conduct that Donald Trump was tried and found guilty for. For a while, the DA was trying to say this conduct of hiding the hush money payments.
Okay,
there we go. So
right
that's
there.
the official moment of the sentence. Donald Trump has now been sentenced to an unconditional discharge.
What does that mean?
That means that it is now official, that Donald Trump has been convicted of a felony. There's two parts of that equation, the conviction, and now we have part two, the sentence. So that is a moment. We now have Donald Trump. I guess you can technically, if you would like to call him a convicted felon, that is a label that now technically applies. But of course, he does have his appeal rights. But again, the focus has been, okay, lawyers are packing up. So
yeah, Judge Merchan is off the bench. So it happened that quickly.
In a lot of ways, not that different from any other sentencing. It took 38 minutes. That's about average for a sentencing in state court. But the focus has largely been on Trump's out-of-court conduct.
Yeah, Caitlin, what do you think? You've been watching all this.
Well, the most interesting statement from Judge Merchan just a few moments ago before he left the bench was acknowledging Trump's election win. He was saying, you know, ordinary citizens don't get these kind of legal protections. It's the Office of the Presidency that is bestowing these to the office holder. And he said, it is the citizenry of this nation that recently decided that you should once again receive the benefits of those protections, essentially acknowledging that, yes, because Donald Trump is going to be inaugurated in a few days, that is changing the sentencing here. I mean, if this had happened in July before he had actually won, you could see, you know, that was way before he was afforded those protections and how different that was.
And Caitlin, you were reporting that Donald Trump did not have to appear in court this morning. He did this over video.
Yeah, I think one thing that I noticed from attending this trial when it was going on is that the way that the Trump team has framed Justice Merchan and how he acts here is so different than what I personally witnessed and reported on from court, which is that the judge actually goes out of his way and bends over backwards a lot of the time to accommodate Donald Trump. He was never bothered when Trump was sitting there, you know, hitting his attorneys, passing them notes, talking sometimes out loud during the hearing. And instead, he allowed him to appear virtually from Mar-a-Lago with his attorney there, Todd Blanche. Another attorney, I believe, was in court.
Is that a photo? We're looking at it right now.
Yeah, and so see the two of them appearing side by side. He was not there actually in the courtroom, which, as Ellie would note, I would assume is pretty unusual for
almost
you to not
unheard
be present.
of. Almost unheard of.
Ellie, what do you make of these images that we're looking at right here?
Well, they got fully dressed up.
This is historic.
I mean, right, and look, this is a criminal defendant at his sentencing sitting in front of the American flag. I mean, I promise you that's never happened before in American history. But as Caitlin said, you know, the judge made clear that you are only getting this sentence. The DA said the same thing because of your status as president. And look, in our legal and constitutional system, the president just is different. One thing we will never know, I wish we could somehow figure this out, what would the sentence have been if Trump had not won the election, right? I mean, there certainly would have been some sort of probation. Judge Merchan, would he have sentenced to prison? It's one of those hypotheticals we'll never know.
Because Laura Coates was saying just a few moments ago that this was essentially a slap on the wrist. This is actually less than that.
I was going to say, at least you feel a slap on the wrist. I'm not sure that this is even that. But again, it does make the conviction official.
Caitlin, I mean, if we could show that image one more time of Trump with his attorney there in that monitor, that is something else. And at one point, I think we just saw an image of him sort of pointing his finger, there it is, at the camera. I guess we don't know what is going on there, but we can guess.
Well, and also, Jim, just to think of it in the full circle moment of, you know, we were covering the White House when this story was kind of first unraveling and being reported publicly, and we learned about the hush money payments and learned about the cover-up and watched Rudy Giuliani go on TV and talk about this. That was so interesting, and to see how that has developed from this moment to now, Trump appearing virtually for this sentencing, which, you know, his attorneys and people in his orbit, his top advisors, had argued this is pretty much a best case scenario from where we were when this guilty verdict came down last May. They, you know, a lot of options, as Ellie noted, had he lost, could have happened here. And so they were arguing essentially take this and go with it. But Trump himself doesn't want to be sworn in as a convicted felon. He now will be as a result of this. But I think to Judge Merchan's point, I mean, the election happened months after Trump was convicted. The American people had enough time to take this guilty verdict in, to digest it, and still, it didn't bother them enough to not reelect him. And
to
that's his argument.
You know, people have said that Donald Trump has just completed the greatest political comeback ever in our history. Maybe I'm not a political expert, but legally, Think back a year and a half ago. I don't believe there's ever been another human being in the history of this country who's been under 4 separate simultaneous indictments in 4 separate jurisdictions. He was looking at 4 trials. Any one of them could have resulted in his imprisonment. Now here we are. This is it. An unconditional discharge on one of the cases. Completely impossible to have predicted this a year and a half ago.
Yeah, he pulled off this incredible political comeback, but at the same time, he is going to be making history. He is going to be entering the White House as a convicted felon until he's able to deal with this in the courts as that legal process continues. Is that essentially it?
That is correct. He is a convicted felon now. He will be 10 days from now when he takes the oath of office. But again, important to keep in mind, like all defendants, he has his appeal rights. That'll take many, many months. So it could happen that
and he could go from the White House to the courthouse or appear virtually from the White House as this appellate process continues on?
Yeah, so defendants don't usually physically appear for their appeals. It's done on paper with briefs. And then when there's oral arguments, his lawyers, Caitlin raises a good question. Who's even going to do this? Because his whole team is coming with him to the administration. He'll find someone. But the lawyers do the oral argument. Defendants usually do not attend those arguments. But, 6-8 months from now, maybe he'll choose to.
We'll see.